Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Welcome.
Good morning. Welcome to today's Immigration Spotlight. My name is Molly Kameen, and I'm one of the new members of the Loretto Community's Latin American Caribbean Committee. Before we start today's program, we'd like to take a minute to honor and grieve for the detained immigrants who have died of COVID this year, particularly the 3 detainees from Stewart Detention Center, including Cipriano Chavez Alvarez, who died this past Monday, Jose Guillen Vega, who died last month, and Santiago Batin Ola from Guatemala, who died in May. And we would also like to say this prayer in honor of 2 of our own sisters who passed away this week, Maureen McCormick and Susan McDonald, as well as Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I'm going to put up a photo for the prayer of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and our 2 sisters.
This poem is used in the Reformed Jewish liturgy as an optional reading before Kaddish, which is a prayer of mourning, and it is called Epitaph and was written by Merritt Malloy. When I die, give what's left of me away to children and old men that wait to die. And if you need to cry, cry for your brother walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around anyone and give them what you need to give to me. I want to leave you something better than words or sounds. Look for me in the people I've known or loved. And if you cannot give me away, at least let me live on in your eyes and not your mind. You can love me most by letting hands touch hands, by letting bodies touch bodies, and by letting go of children that need to be free. Love doesn't die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away. Amen.
Thank you, Maureen. So as many of you know, LICC has been hosting bi-monthly immigration spotlights to bring attention to what's been happening in detention centers during COVID with some changes in the asylum law and other topics. But today's spotlight will be focused on Stewart Detention Center, which is located in rural Georgia. It's one of the largest detention centers in the United States. A few miles up the road from Stewart is an incredible beacon of hope called El Refugio, which means the refuge. El Refugio is a hospitality house, and it is also a ministry of visitation to serving and visiting immigrants and their families, and the immigrants who are detained in Stewart Detention Center. I visited Stewart Detention Center several times in 2010 with our speaker for today, PJ Edwards. And I still remember making the drive from Atlanta, it's about 2 or 3 hours, and being very confused about why the government would place an immigration detention center in such a rural location, away from lawyers, away from judges, and away from all of the support systems that these immigrants had. It soon became clear, however, that this was exactly the point, that a geographically isolated immigrant is less likely to get an attorney, to be able to advocate for themselves, and to be seen in the public eye. So our speakers today are going to speak about the current situation in Stewart Detention Center with COVID and the work of El Refugio. Our first speaker will be PJ Edwards. PJ focuses on social justice education, advocacy, and direct service. Much of his current work relates to immigration. He also applies his business and organizational development experience to the missions of nonprofit organizations with whom he works. With Just Faith Ministries, PJ has served as board co-chair and executive director, and he continues to organize Just Faith groups locally. PJ is a co-founder of El Refugio Hospitality House and serves as a board chair. He has also served on the steering committee for Georgia Detention Watch and as Detention Watch Network co-chair. PJ earned a BBA from the University of Georgia, and his former professional experience includes work with large firms, such as Home Depot and Deloitte, down to the startup organizations, including his own consulting practice. PJ has been married to his spouse, Amy Edwards, since 1995. Amy was going to join us, but had another commitment, and Amy works for Deloitte and also is involved with El Refugio. Our second speaker for today is our own Eleanor Craig, who is a sister of Loretto who lives in Narings, Kentucky. Eleanor is the director of the Loretto Heritage Center, which is an incredible archive of Loretto's history. And Eleanor will discuss her experience marching to Stewart Detention Center as part of the School of the Americas protest and establishing a Loretto connection with El Refugio. So with that, I will turn it over to PJ.
Thank you, Molly. Thanks for having me, everybody. Try to share my screen, make sure the technology works. Molly, would it be helpful if I gave a little bit of the history, or do you want me to just jump in and get to the facts?
No, I'd love the history.
So I'll try to be brief. I'm a little chatty. For Amy and I, as you heard, I'm a business person, and so is Amy. We went through the full Just Faith program, and it really decided to change our direction. So we decided that we'd live more simply, which is hypocritical. We're quite comfortable, but live off of just one salary so that we could use my evil business and organizational skills to do direct service and work with nonprofits. That's kind of been the focus of our life. In 2008, the church that we're going to went from being majority white to being majority Latino almost overnight, largely undocumented. So our start was really trying to create some dialogue around immigration. We're continued to be upset that it's such a wedge issue. So just even within our own parish, we started doing Immigration 101 presentations with some outside good counsel to educate the community first. And then our real focus was dialogue sessions, which we still do both of those things, but the dialogue sessions bring recent immigrants and US born together in small groups to have a dialogue, not a debate about immigration, and try to make that connection, that transformative power of personal relationships. And that was the idea behind visiting the detention center as well. So I'm not an immigration attorney, but I give a lot of immigration talks, and I want to be factual and knowledgeable. And so as I was learning about immigration, I learned about immigration detention, and it just pissed me off. It's largely unnecessary, it's exploitative, it's these for-profit companies. So I went to a Detention Watch Network strategy session in DC, and they told me about a couple others in Georgia Detention Watch, they're also trying to engage this issue. So in 2008, I joined Georgia Detention Watch. We organized the first group visit at Stewart. And again, it was the idea of being there for our detained friends and it was that welcome, trying to practice compassion by suffering with them for the little ways that we could in the time that we had. And also is really an immersion experience for US born and others to come kind of see for yourself. And again, that personal relationship. 2010, we opened up our first hospitality house. We rented this small house that Molly and Bernadette have been at. It was built by not professional people back in the 50s, had one bathroom, but we tried to make it as welcoming and loving as we could. And the detained people at Stewart get one 1-hour visit a week, but the weekend's on Saturday. So we saw these families driving from North Carolina for 10 hours. So somebody else suggested, hey, why don't you geniuses open up a hospitality house so these people have a place to stay? And so we started doing that. And then at the end of 2018, TBS and the comedian Samantha B gave us a new house. We had to do we spent twice as much fixing it up, but it's a much larger, beautiful, old historic house there in Stewart. And so we still do pretty much the same things, providing hospitality for families, visitation, education, and advocacy work that I'll talk a little bit more about. So with that, I'll breeze through this as quickly as I can. So Molly asked me to focus on Stewart and kind of what's happened with COVID and the changes that we're making. So as she mentioned, it's about 140 miles south of Atlanta, very rural. Stewart County is the 11th least populous county in the state, has about 6,000 some people. It's very poor. It's majority African American, 47% African American. Median household income is about $25,000 versus $55,000 for Georgia overall. And persons below the poverty level are about 38% there versus 14% for Georgia. So very poor, very rural county. Kind of ironically, 1850s was its heyday, and it had 10,000 people living in the county, but over 7,000 were enslaved. It was huge cotton plantations that were there. So it was one of the wealthiest counties, but it still kind of has its exploitative history. By the way, I meant to mention, I'm going to send you, Molly, this presentation is a PDF, so it'll have all my notes and links and all that. So I probably won't hit every bullet point just so I'm not journeying on for too long. But it's owned and operated by Core Civic, one of the large for-profit prison companies. Their revenue is, I think, $2.8 billion in 2019. It is the largest immigrant detention center currently. Its capacity is about 1,900. It's below that now, but they have a guaranteed minimum of 1,600. So no matter what happens, no matter what administration comes in, they're going to collect their money. 94% of people detained at the SCC have no legal representation, and this is from an SPLC study. And 98.2% of immigrants at SCC lose their cases. So back in 2015, about 50% of asylum cases were granted relief, and Stewart was less than 2%. So it's very unlucky if you turn yourself in at the border seeking asylum to get sent to Stewart. I almost wonder if Stewart is the place where the government sends people they really want to deport, because your chances there are so slim. Just as a tangent, I'll mention that the first quarter of 2020, the relief rate went down nationally to about 27%. So the Trump administration has pushed for less relief, and credible fear interviews more being declined. So it's been quite the challenge. So some of the issues at Stewart, very remote, as we mentioned, labor exploitation. The detainees get paid between $1 to $4 a day to do all the cooking, the cleaning, the haircuts, which is not only exploitative, hypocritical, given that they're in there because they're not allowed to legally work in the United States. And so these for-profit companies can get away with paying this little amount. And again, you've in an area that is desperate for jobs. Restrictive visitation policy. If you come and visit, it's like what you see in the movies, the plexiglass and the phones that don't work very well. And again, the irony, Jackson, Georgia is where we have our death row prison. And if you go visit there, it's contact visits. You sit a little table across from each other. And here you've got all these people that have no criminal activity, and it's super restrictive. Lack of adequate health care. The health care has been outsourced to another for-profit company. We have problems with getting adequate nurses and medical in Southern Georgia, and so it's even harder to get folks there. So it's really difficult for folks. A lot of complaints that all they do is give them Tylenol and tell them to go back to their bunk. Significant language barriers. Most of the guards are African American females, as a matter of fact. Very few people speak another language. Since I've been doing this since 2008, I've only met one guard. I hope there's others, but I've only met one guard that speaks Spanish. Excessive use of solitary confinement. So being in detention, as many of you know, there's no codified laws about how people are to be treated. So no laws about access to health care, education, all these kinds of things. It's just some ICE standards that are not enforced, and there's very little oversight. The standards allow that somebody can be placed in solitary confinement for up to 14 days before there's any meaningful review of whether they really need to be in solitary confinement or not. So these for-profit prison companies can put somebody for up to 14 days with really no accountability to anyone, and that Stewart definitely does that. Lack of basic sanitation and nutrition, potatoes all the time, chicken once a week. A lot of complaints about the food is undercooked, or they get food that was stale already before they even started cooking it. Lack of protections for vulnerable individuals. Stewart is a male facility, but there are transgender females there as well, as an example of a vulnerable population that doesn't get the kind of accommodations that they should. and lack of religious accommodations. They make it very, very hard for priests and others to come in. They have to go through a bunch of training. They don't announce when they're coming in, so they'll show up for mass and nobody will be there because they didn't make it, and they just throw a lot of roadblocks in. I personally think it's because they don't want any oversight. They have the comfort of nobody looking over their shoulders. So there was a priest, a Catholic priest, that was going there 2 or 3 times a week. Is really dedicated to doing it. And they found an excuse to ask him not to come back anymore. And they were worried that he was collaborating with us, which he was, but they were worried about exposing what's going on there. So just some updates about what's kind of changed with us. So now the visitation program has stopped because Stewart's not allowing visits. They're not allowing people to go into the court that's there. So hence we don't have any guests coming, and we have our own concerns about having people come and our own volunteers to the house. So there's no visiting right now. So we've had to make a number of pivots, if you will. So again, I'm not going to overpresent this, and I'll send this to you. ICE has been reporting confirmed cases, 341 last I checked at Stewart Detention Center, 2 cases among the ICE staff, which they haven't been reporting. I can't believe it's that low, and about 80 employees. And we get the civic reports from news articles, not that ICE is reporting about it. The way that ICE is reporting it makes it hard to tell what the real percentage of positive is, because they're not telling you people that have gone through during the time it's been there and the numbers. So it's something, but it's hard to tell like how high the positivity rate is. And as we mentioned, we've had three men die since this started of COVID-related complications at this detention center, which has a poor history, to say the least. I guess kind of on the positive side, to give the government credit, there are been a reduction of the detained population. So it's down about 47% since March when this started. The numbers were much higher. At the end of the year, there were about 50,000 people in detention, and now it's dropped down to 20,000 some. Initial book-ins, which is this graph that you see, has also declined. So they are bringing fewer people in. They've not released a bunch of people like in the United States. Most of the reduction has come from deportations, and there's been lots of reports of them deporting people that were testing positive or were positive with COVID-19. And they're still transferring people around. The latest gentleman that died had transferred from Irwin since he'd gotten there. So there's still people coming in and still people being transferred. At Stewart right now, as of the beginning of September, there are 1,380 people still there. So it's about 70% of their capacity. So some of the things that we're hearing will be no surprise, not possible to social distance, very little PPE. They're keeping, instead of using the dining hall, they're keeping our detained friends and whatever cell or pod they're in, and the staff has been bringing them food, which is not what normally happens. So there've been complaints about not getting enough food and not getting food consistently. A lot of worry and concern about medical requests. They have an isolation unit, or they've got a pod, they call them, that they've used for isolation, and they've put some people in solitary. They've quelled peaceful protest. In the link is an article about one of the protests and how it was handled by the STC. Employees are getting screened as they come in. I will note that Stewart County, if you were to look at the map of where there's COVID outbreaks, there's 3 red counties. 2 of them are Stewart County and the county, Chattahoochee County, just above it, where a lot of the employees work. So we think that there's a lot going on there still with COVID in that area that's affecting more than detainees, but the community as well. And as I mentioned, new detainees are still arriving and being transferred. So we've done a lot of pivoting since then, a lot of advocacy work, and I'll send you links and notes if you would like to do some advocacy work yourself. But we've been advocating for the release of specific individuals that we know about. We've been pestering the Georgia Department of Health, who has the power to go in and inspect the facility and do things. And they sent us a message that basically said, yeah, we offer help to ICE when they need it, and would really have done nothing. We even conspired with some friends that work at the CDC to try to get to the right people and push, but we've not had a lot of luck with them. We wrote to the Georgia delegation in Congress about the situation, and just yesterday we created with others another note now that we've heard about the report from Irwin that we'll probably talk about in a second here with some of the things going on there. And Irwin's another detention center in Georgia. We have a hotline, and our detained friends call us and their families call us. So we've staffed that up. We've done a lot of research about other wraparound social services. We're limited with what we can do. We're not a bunch of social workers. We don't, provide food and things like that very often, but we've used some money for gift cards. We've created a database, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, of wraparound social services for the families, and have been trying to do a little bit more than what we would normally do. We've been putting funds on the phone and commissary accounts, which, in some ways it feels like supporting the system because that money is going back to other for-profit companies or to the detention center. But at the same time, our friends are very concerned, and now without visits, they're not able to see us, see their families. So we want them to be able to do that. We want them to be able to buy extra soap in the commissary or things like that if they need it. Hartsfield is our airport, and they were releasing a few people. And so we were getting volunteers to kind of catch people at Hartsfield. They might not have exactly the travel documents they need, might not know how to navigate the system. So we're providing support there. And we still are doing post-release support as a program that we were starting up. So when men are released, they have some place to go. Otherwise, ICE wouldn't release them, but they might not know how to get to the bus, how to get a ticket to Houston or what have you. They might not have the funds to do it. So we were helping them get their travel arranged and supporting them getting to their sponsors or to their family. So in lieu of visits, we've been doing Zoom calls that do orientation with groups that otherwise were going to visit with us. And instead of visiting, we've asked people to write a detained friend. And we're trying to really inspire a pen pal program where people will write them consistently. We ask people to write like once every 3 weeks. So not a huge commitment, but to have an ongoing relationship with one of our detained friends. Sending care packages to family, offering a lot of education and dialogue sessions, which if any of you want to organize something, we'd be glad to participate. We do Immigration 101 and Common Missing Concerns. We can talk just about immigration detention if you like. We do the dialogue sessions and can bring in some of our immigrant friends to participate in that as well. And it's actually, we've been very busy doing that. So there has been a lot of interest around this topic. Scenario planning, how are we going to open back up? So like even now, some people do get released and their families go to get them. How are we going to keep everybody safe? When visiting happens again, what's our response going to be? So we've been spending a lot of time thinking about that. I've got to take a trip down there and just install some like no-touch faucets and soap dispensers and things like that. So we've been thinking about what's the next steps for us when things change. And so they have installed a video visit program at Stewart now. And we're trying to figure out how we could use that to get like college groups and church groups to be able to do a visit and protect everybody's privacy. So we're working on that. We're developing a sponsorship network, and sponsorship is when ICE says, or the immigration court says, we'll release somebody if they have some place to go and somebody that's going to sponsor them. So we've been working with partners to find, it's not a big demand right now, but we want to be able to do that. So we've been working about building a network of people that are willing to support people that could get released if they have a sponsor. So becoming a pen pal, how you can help. We've been asking for funds to put on people's phone and commissary accounts. We've been still constantly recruiting for hotline volunteers. I'll send you some links in the notes about if you want to talk to your legislature or ICE about advocating for release and change, and organize the dialogue sessions and education sessions that I mentioned. So that is my presentation. So Q&A or Eleanor can share her experience.
Thank you, BJ. Eleanor, would you like to talk about your visit, maybe your impressions of Stewart and Lumpkin, Georgia, and then we'll move on to questions?
That'll be fine. Yes. Okay. If any of you saw my little blog post about myself as a protester, then my description about my contact with Stewart will make sense. I'm one of those people who I'll be glad to put my body wherever it needs to be to help the cause. But my mind is often someplace else, and that is certainly my experience about Stewart. I went to Georgia, to Columbus, to protest at the SOA protest. I think it was in 2014, maybe it was 13. And some people said, we're all going to protest a detention center on Saturday. So I got on the bus. I knew nothing. We drove very much far longer than I thought. And lived in a tiny little town where there was an extremely impressive protest getting underway. People around the courthouse in the little town, lots of banners, lots of sticks, and there was a drum, there was people singing. So I felt right at home, but I'm trying not to say I'm embarrassed, but I am. I'm embarrassed that I was engaged in an activity with so little knowledge about what it was about. Trusted that anybody who would protest at the School of the Americas would take me only to another relevant place of trouble. And that was true. So we marched the mile or so down a steep road and up a steep hill to the detention center. And again, because of the angle at which we approached the detention center, I had no idea it was so vast. And many people were inside. And I had a sense of, and I still do, a sense of being cut off from the whole experience because I have no Spanish at all. And some of the speakers were speaking in Spanish, so again, I experienced being there as an ally, the way that is talking about allies, totally ignorant, but willing to be present as a witness. It seems to me like it was a valuable thing if 3/4 of the people in that march I was in were in the same mindset I was. It was still a really good march and large numbers, and should have put that privately held prison management people on their knowing that people were watching or becoming acquainted. So as we returned to our cars, I was aware of a little building where the a lot of people waved to us from their homes as we marched. But this particular little building, people seemed a little bit more engaged, and they had signs in the yard and all of that, but they noticed. The next year, however, as we made the same march, the folks in the front yard of El Refugio had signs out saying, on your way back after the march, have lunch with us. And so I found the group of Loretto folks and said, let's do that. Let's go. It's some kind of hospitality place. Let's go support their lunch, which we did do. And it was excellent food, I must say. And again, I was really ignorant. I didn't, unacquainted is a better word, I guess. I didn't know the dimensions of what El Refugio meant. But when I asked the people working, I think it was the board members who were working the lunch, something about it, and I was told sort of the elevator version of El Refugio's mission, I said immediately, well, take me to somebody who's in charge because I want to tell them about sources of income from Loretto. So that's my big investment here, is that without knowing very much at all, it was clear to me that this was a venture that the Loretto community would be happy to have our funds used for. That is what I understood at the time, the nurture of and the companionship with families whose members were detained. And so I focused mostly on the families. I did ask, it was Amilcar who I was introduced to, and he took us on a tour of the little house. It really was a pretty sad little house, but it looked, to tell you the truth, when I saw it and was told how it was, I was reminded that my white middle class expectations about nice housing are really different from the expectations of people whose family members are in really deep trouble and they're not even in the country of their birth. And so I was satisfied with that little house. I thought, this is a good little house. People will feel comfortable here. And so I'm glad you've got a bigger, better house, but I wouldn't have criticized that little one. It was very welcoming. So Amilcar told me that he would be glad to see what we had. So when I got back to the mother house, I did send him the information about the Loretto Special Needs Fund. And then we communicated as he prepared the grant proposal for funds. And we did that, I think, 2 years, maybe 3 years. Then the third year, the grant request was refused, and I didn't like that at all. So I went to find our folks who are on the Loretto Special Needs Committee, and I said, why did you refuse? And they told me their reasons, and then I worked with Amilcar to do other requests. Then also, I started to get communication from El Refugio about what was going on and what the needs were. And the first one that we were struck by was a need for clothing. So quite ironically, Loretto Mother House gathered together lots of clothes for men. And a group of 4 of us drove them down to Atlanta and left them at the place where Amilcar lives. When I think about that, I think it probably was sort of foolish of us. It probably used a lot of resources that could have been better allocated, and money probably would have been better. But I got the impression from talking to Amilcar that actually the sources of clothing for the detainees were drying up close to the detention center, and so they needed to branch out. I might have misunderstood. But we drove to Louisville and bought at the Goodwill and the Salvation Army, and that's what we took. What I want to say is this, that when there is a program that is at all, quote, close, and Columbus is, and Stewart, well, I'll say Stewart, is about 6 hours drive from here. It really made sense to me that we try to look a way that this concentration of Sisters of Loretto at the Mother House could have a sense of connection. However tentative, however superficial, at least some sense that that there are people who are in trouble and in need, and they are just barely beyond our reach. And if we reach out a little bit farther, we can add some little help. About the big help that we gave, but I do want to brag about having gotten to know what was needed at a distance, but close enough that we could help. So what I want to emphasize really is that a group like LACC is bringing word to us ordinary Loretto people about needs, and the more specific they can be, or the more just people like me who basically I'm just committed to putting my body on the line because I have no relevant skills, but bodies count, it turns out, and I have contacts with little funds of money, and that counts too. So I'm there. That's enough to say.
Thanks, Eleanor.
Eleanor, thank you so much. And so many things that you just said really resonated with me, but I think most importantly, the fact that we can be allies and companions, even when we don't maybe totally understand the depth of the issue or don't have other skills to offer. That's a very important stance to take. So thank you
Yeah,
for.
I think I want to add one other thing when you put it that way, Molly. That I find myself with almost all of Loretto's social justice work overwhelmed with unableness. And I challenge that in myself on a regular basis, but in just tiny ways, because I know that it's the normal condition of people who are privileged, like I am, and like we Lorettos in general are, is that it's just easier not to pay attention because it hurts not to be able to. And that's completely self-centered. I haven't read that book about white fragility, but that's what I think the phrase means, is that the hurt to me of not being able to help is so self-centered, but it keeps me from being helpful.
I mean, for us, I mean, that was a big part of we feel that helplessness, again, been visiting since 2008, and things haven't gotten much better. In fact, times have gotten much worse. And I mean, I didn't even touch on the heartbreaking stories. I mean, sometimes it's hard for me to go visit again. I tend to visit the same person multiple times. And when somebody gets deported or killed, it's hard to do that. But I didn't mention that when we started, the group that started this was really out of a faith perspective. And the frustration is like, what can we do? We can go visit, we can get other people to visit, we can try to increase the awareness of it. But also it is that faithfulness to continue to do it, whether it works or not. Like, Jesus told me to do this, I'm gonna keep doing it, kind of thing, is kind of our own kind of personal response to that. While we try to do these systemic changes, it's, we're fighting a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure that is politically expedient for some people. So there is this hopelessness to it. But it is that I refer to the fishes and loaves story, where I can offer this little piece of bread, I can offer this fish, and if I can get other people to do it, then maybe Jesus will handle the miracle for us. So.
I like that point of view. Thanks.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Both speakers and both perspectives were amazing to hear. I have a question or two, but let me open it up to anyone else first for any comments or questions. And if not, I'll start. PJ, you had mentioned in one of the slides that 94% of detainees don't have legal representation, which is not surprising to me based on the location of Stewart and how isolated it is. Can you speak a little bit about work being done to get legal representation to people at Stewart?
Sure. Yeah, it's really been difficult. So we have a lot of the immigration attorneys are in the cities in Atlanta and Macon, and a lot of them won't take detained cases, and it's systemic injustice. So the relief rate is so low, right? So even if they take the case, just off the bat, the chances of winning are almost nil. So some of them morally just don't want to take the money. Some of them, it's just not worth it. They've got to give up a day to go down to Stewart, where they get treated like crap by the process. And so it's hard to get representation. So it's been a real struggle. Things have gotten better. After Trump was elected, I've been courting the SPLC for probably 2 or 3 years before that. And they had a couple attorneys that were working on immigration detention just a little bit, but just overall, what kind of systemic court cases can we bring? They had other projects as well. But when Trump was elected, they had some kind of epiphany and said, we really want to get engaged with this. So they started a program where they've got a couple of attorneys stationed at Stewart, and they have a few of these. It's called CFI, the Southern Immigration Freedom Initiative. And so they partnered with us, and they get volunteer attorneys from around the country to come and help, process these cases, to interview people and things like that. So they've been a huge help, and we would let them use we weren't using the hospital house during the week, so we'd let these visiting attorneys and paralegals and translators use the house. So we've developed quite a relationship, and really trying to support each other. They he has people we should go visit. We feed them people we think that maybe they could look at their cases. They're focused solely on bonding people out. So not solving their case, but bonding out is a huge deal. The bond rate, again, is very low, like everything else there at Stewart. But if you can bond out, you have a much better chance of finding an attorney. You can move your case out of Stewart, which is obviously a very good thing to do. So bonding out's a pretty big deal, and that's what they've got the capacity for. They've taken on some other more for a few people, and I think they'd like to expand, but their focus is bonding out. So they've made a difference there. There's been another change in the past couple of years that has been helpful, improving the situation. That's a couple of the immigration judge changed. So there were some that were, you wouldn't believe me if I told you the things that they said, but some of those are gone. So it's still the lowest relief of all the immigration courts in the country, but it has improved a little bit. There's also another guy, Marty Rosenblum, who if you haven't heard of, he's insane. He's out of North Carolina. He actually decided to move to Lumpkin, so he's stationed there, and he works for profit. He does some pro bono, but he's also been a strong advocate and has been engaged, and I think he's drawn a lot of attention and got other attorneys. He's kind of got an Airbnb for other attorneys to try to encourage more attorneys to come down to represent people.
PJ, what is the typical amount of the bonds that are set? And does Southern Poverty Law Center have its own fund for this, or do they fundraise for that purpose?
So the bonds in immigration are tough. The average now is high. It's between $5,000 and $10,000. I don't know factually, but I know that range is. I feel very confident about that range. And unlike in the criminal system, you don't just have to come up with 10% use of bail bondsman. You got to come up with all of it. So right now the SPLC doesn't have their own funds, but there are a couple of other organizations that do fundraise and provide bond funds, and we often turn to them. If the family can't raise the money, then we'll turn to other organizations, or sometimes we'll do a GoFundMe if we need to try to help individuals.
One more question. Do you find that many of the prisoners at Stewart are not granted bonds?
Many are not. And there's a thing called mandatory detention that I won't explain the whole thing, but if people have certain criminal things on their background or other things, then they're not eligible for bond. So there's a huge percentage of the population that's not eligible to bond out, unfortunately.
And just PJ as background, we've been doing a bit of bond work with one of our partners. Where is Bob located?
In Arizona.
Arizona. And he's just an individual.
Eloy.
Yeah, an individual who has been connected with this detention center. So we've been working to get him money for individuals that he comes across through letter writing or through other connections. Hence Sally's questions. We're trying to figure out the best way to kind of do this internally, but that's good to know that that what you're seeing as well is that when you're bonded out, your chances are way better. That's what we've been hearing as well.
And if you want, I can send some information about those other organizations that are providing these bond funds, if you'd like to learn a little bit about them.
Yeah.
You know, PJ and Eleanor, thank you so much. And I think for us, LACC, we have visited, before COVID, the detention center in Eloy. And as Molly mentioned, Bob Key has worked with helping us know a lot more about bonding out and letter writing. And we did start, and there are 14 people right now writing to people in Eloy, women. And a positive thing, Mary Bundy has been writing to Raina, and she got bonded out. And 4 or 5 people have had low bonds, like one was 2,000. Loretto helped bond her out, and then 5,000 and 8,000. But Raina's bond was 20,000. And somehow she's in Oakland right now with her dad, and aunts and other brothers and sisters. So they did something to get that 20,000. So that's positive. And for me, what's positive is everything you're doing at Stewart. You know, I think we all have to do what we can do where we are and just keep trying to change the system. You know?
Thanks, Eugene. Yeah.
PJ, I have some questions. I have a lot of questions, but the one, I wonder if you could send us information about the video chats, because we're
Yeah.
so isolated from the folks now. I mean, we used to visit and now we can't. And the phone calls, honestly, I talked to a woman who I visited who was deported to Cameroon, and I can hear her better in Cameroon than I could hear her 20 miles away at the detention center. So it's crazy. If you could send information about that. And then philosophically, I was just reading over responses from my legislators here in Colorado. And it seems to me that we have to end the private prison deal. And I don't know how you feel about that. I know you would like to see it, but in terms of what to do, you know, how strongly or how successful you think something like that might be. Because all of this stuff that I'm reading from the legislators is dealing with like TPS people or that kind of thing. And we're not talking about people that are leaving El Salvador because they can't live there anymore. And they're coming here and presenting themselves into a private situation where you said there's no control over what happens. I don't know how you feel about that work.
It's super challenging. So about probably 85 or 90% of detainees are under some for-profit company right now. The facility might be owned by the government, but it's operated by for-profit, or like Stewart, owned and operated by a for-profit company. But I do want to mention that local municipalities are getting involved with this as well, and they're equally bad that they do it. So you've got these county jails that have extra capacity, so they'll do a contract with ICE as well. So it's not all just the for-profit, but the for-profit is a headache, and it's a monster challenge. I don't have it in this presentation, but Core Civic, who runs Stewart, spends millions and millions every year lobbying, paying into political campaigns. And so it's a monster. Once you put money into something, just retracting it is super hard. So there's certainly the aspect of trying to educate more people, get more people to write their Congress people and complain. But, you know, I mean, systemically, it costs a lot to be a senator, and they got to get money from someplace. And I go visit my senators, and I'm not leaving the kind of check behind that Core Civic is. So it's that challenge. I personally think part of it has to be through litigation and be sly about what we do. Like, I'm really glad that there's a lawsuit. There's a couple, but there's one in Colorado about that pay, about not paying minimum wage.
Right.
So I think doing things also like making it more expensive and taking the profit out of it are something else that I'd like to see more groups focus on as well. So really being creative, and of course my business mind, like, you know, how do we make this unattractive as a business? I think we need to be doing some of that work as well, but it's certainly an uphill battle.
I'm sure it's supporting that little community. When you say that most of the women are African American, I'm sure that's supporting the whole town.
Yeah, we really try to make a point. You know, I talk about how our detained friends there are forgotten, and most Americans have no idea about that the place exists, what's going on there. But that community is forgotten as well. Rural poverty is a real thing. And so you've got one school, it's 100% African American. The white kids pay other counties to go to school in other counties that are actually living there. So it's a dead end place to be. There's no opportunities. And so in some ways they've been exploited as well. So the for-profit companies come in and do the deal, and they hire about 340 people. So their largest employer in that county, and the county gets about roughly $1 a day per person there. So the county's getting something out of it. It's about 20% of their operating budget last I checked. So, but they're exploited. I am sure that a lot of those guards would rather be doing something else if they had the opportunities, but they've been excluded. So it's a challenge. And it's something we were just talking about the other day is what's our strategy to shut Stewart down? And if we do, what's going to happen to the guards that are there, and trying to balance those things. And we certainly don't have the answer, don't have it figured out. But it's an interesting dynamic, to say the least, about who's working there and who's detained there. And it's all people of color all the way around.
PJ, who owns the building, that massive complex?
Core Civic does. This one, they own and operate. And it was built as a medium security detention center, and medium's not a good adjective because medium is actually a very high level of security. So Bernadette and Molly can talk about their experiences there, but I mentioned the plexiglass and the control. It's very strict. And it's not supposed to be punitive immigration detention. It is. Core Civic runs all kinds of different prisons, criminal, state, federal, and they run them all the same way. And no matter how you slice it, they're punitive systems because it's cheap. If you had contact visits, you need more guards and better trained guards. So being super restrictive makes it's a for-profit company, at least more for profit.
Thank you. Let's go to Kathy's house and then to Rosa for the next two questions, and then we'll try to wrap up around noon.
Okay, this is Mary Ellen, not Kathy. But I'd like to. I'm just wondering, and I understand a little bit better now in those questions. But I've been wondering how your group survives under these conditions. I mean. And what is your relationship with this whole group that is in charge? Because it seems like they purposely don't want anybody there to know anything. And it's a miracle, as Mary Jean talked about, being so grateful for this group that can do this and get by with it. I mean, are you really? You're limited in what you can do, but
what's your relationship?
Yeah,
with
what is your relationship with the people that are actually running this thing?
Right. So with ICE won't deal with us. They send us threatening letters that are going to shut us down. And the Atlanta field office, who runs the Southeast, is the most aggressive that there is, as far as I'm concerned, in the country. So they won't deal with us very much unless they have to. They won't even meet with us anymore. With the detention center itself, the thing that drives them is their relationship with ICE, because that's how they would lose their contract, and they're obligated to allow visits. So it's been a fine line for us with the warden. There's a new warden there now. We've met with him. He seems to really appreciate it. I will say that we've won some of the guards over, because it's typically the same guards that are working the front in the visitation, and they know, and they talk about how, PJ wants us to lose our jobs and things like that, but they know that we're not making any money doing this, and whether they agree with us or not, they know that we're doing this out of our faith, out of our sense of responsibility that our country is doing this. And I can say that we've allowed them to be compassionate. So like, we get in trouble if we talk about El Refugio in the waiting room because there's no soliciting, but now the guards will say, listen, you came too late to visit, you can't visit today, but talk to him. He's got a place you can stay. Or things like, they won't let you visit if you have torn jeans or if your shoulder is showing, and it's hot down here, so, and it's style to have torn jeans. So they say, you can't visit with that. You should have read it on the website, but talk to him because we have clothes at the house we can give them to come visit. So we've given the guards the opportunity, and I think they appreciate it. And then they I think, when it's super crowded, they like sending people over to wait at our house and just say, go wait at El Refugio and come back in a couple hours. But, we're also trying to do systemic change, and we do interviews and we say bad things about Core Civic and all that. So we've had to be pretty careful, and the board is cognizant of that. So we try to be sly about that. Like, a lot of us are part of other organizations, like I mentioned, Georgia Detention Watch. So if we have some rally like we're going to have soon again, we'll do it not under the name of El Refugio, but use one of our partner organizations, or we'll work with Southern Poverty Law Center, Project South, and we'll feed them information, because we know more than anybody about what's going on at Stewart, because we do so many visits. I mean, we're doing, I don't know, like 400 or 500 visits, a year pre-COVID. So we've talked to a lot of people and we have a sense of what's going on. So we try to use the information we have to feed other reports and kind of not rock the boat too much directly with Stuart, but it's a balancing act. I will also mention that we've been working with a lot more mental health professionals, both for our detained friends and their families, but also for us and our volunteers. So we've offered our staff and our regular coordinators free counseling sessions with a group of mental health professionals in Atlanta that have graciously volunteered to work with us.
Rosa, do you want to ask one question?
Yeah, just very quickly. I mean, I wanted, thanks to PJ and thanks really, Molly, for organizing this, and thanks, Eleanor. You know, it coincided when we started talking about this with the news about this complaint about, you know, unlawful hysterectomies and stuff at Irwin. So this is very timely. But I wanted to ask about the COVID rates. I mean, they're much higher here at Stewart. And are those accurate? And is Stewart just publishing that, or are you putting pressure? I mean, you say that, you know, they don't really want to talk to you, but what are you finding out? Because they seem really high and compared to others.
Yeah, they are high. They jumped recently, and I know from talking to the warden, the reason they jumped is because they finally tested everybody, you know, all at once. And we don't even know how many. I'm very skeptical of the numbers, but ICE has a website, and if you guys like, I include that in the follow-up information that's publishing, and they update it at least once a week about the number of infections, but you can't really tell from their data how many people are really being tested. Are they really reporting? There was a news story at one of the, it was a county facility, and early on they tested everybody and posted it, and there was an article about how I said, hey, don't do that. Stop testing everybody and don't publish that information. And that was before they started with their own website. So I believe, and my wife says I'm too skeptical, but I believe that ICE is really not being completely forthcoming or honest. And it's really hard to draw conclusions from the data that they're giving us. So it's a little bit of a carrot that they're giving us some information, but we don't know what the truth is. It's funny, if you look at the link, like I said, they were also reporting on how many ICE employees, not core civic employees, but ICE employees are getting infected, and they've not updated it in forever. So either working for ICE is some kind of cure for COVID, or they're not giving us real information.
Thank you.
I know we're almost probably out of time, but I did want to give Bernadette or Molly a chance to share, if they want to, a little bit about their experience with us in the detention center, because they've been there.
Bernadette, why don't you hop on? Bernadette is my former roommate. We both did the Jesuit Volunteer Corps together in Atlanta in 2010, which is very similar to the Loretto Volunteer Program, which is how we met PJ and his wife, Amy. So take it away, Bern.
Yeah, PJ and Amy took Molly and our other roommate, Jordan, who works in immigration law, down to El Refugio and Stewart Detention Center now in 2010, 2011. And I still support Jesuit volunteers in Atlanta. And I always tell them that it was probably one of the most formative experiences that I had that year. I can echo what's already been said. The monstrosity that is Stewart Detention Center is alarming as soon as you pull up. The way that it looks, the level of security, and I echo what was said about kind of the feeling you get when you're there and afterwards. The last time I visited with a group of students, I saw a young man who had been involved in anti-government protests in Nicaragua, and who knew that if he was sent back to Nicaragua, there would be people waiting to arrest him at the airport. And so that was just really illuminating to talk to him about the risk he had taken and about, and I found myself really doing holy waiting after that, wanting to know what was going to happen with his case. And it's so inhumane. Like, you call this hotline, enter a number, and then they tell you about someone's life. But yeah, I'm still in Atlanta, so I've been able to take a couple student groups down with the help of PJ to do some visits. And I think it continues to be just such an incredible ministry, and I'm really grateful for the involvement.
Thank you, Bernadette. LACC Friends, what do we think about the Bob Key update, or should we save that in the essence of time? Oh, you're still muted, Mary Jean. Hold on. There we go.
Okay. I talked with Bob yesterday, and it's so similar to Stuart. I mean, there's been a new outbreak of COVID, and people, there's no way of isolation, but a lot more people have been put in what they consider the hole. And if they're sick, they have started using the hole for the COVID to isolate. And the whole is no contact, you know, it's horrible. And also there's been indoor or in Eloy, a protest of the migrants that are in there. And everyone who did it was stuck. They developed more holes. And Bob also, you know, he talked about the same thing that PJ, lack of transparency. That's, you know, I'm just grateful things are happening at other detention centers instead of just Eloy and La Palma that we know about. So that's it. Bob will be on next time. He couldn't get on today. So.
Thank you, Mary Jean.
Molly, I just wanted to say one thing, an update about the one on Guatemala or
Sure.
Spotlight. I got a text from Caitlin who spoke, and she said that 20% of the people that are deported from was that it? 20% of the people that are deported from the US have COVID.
Right.
So they're bringing it back to Guatemala.
And what happens is once they have COVID and they get deported, they wait until there's a plane full. And here, this person has COVID and gets on a plane with others, and they're flown back to Guatemala. And that has happened because Mary Bundy was writing to one woman, Anna, and she got switched, like PJ said, to someplace in Louisiana where they had a lot of COVID. And then everyone who was deported got on the same plane and flew to Guatemala, because the government has to have a full plane that goes. They don't want to waste any money, you know, push them all in there and, you know, oh my God. Yeah. So.
Thank you, Mary Jean, for that update, and Maureen as well. And thank you, PJ. Eleanor had to jump off, but this was so informative, and PJ has mentioned that he has other presentations on more of the basics of immigration law, if that's something we'd be interested in another time. But this was incredible to hear these updates, and unfortunately echoes everything we've been hearing from the other detention centers as well. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you, Bernadette.